Thank you for joining us. I'm honored to welcome you to this evening's webinar, Healthy Minds Initiative, in collaboration with the Beach Cities Health District here in Redondo Beach and partnering with Drs. Dean and Aisha Sherzai. Together, Dr. Sherzai co-direct the Brain Health and Alzheimer's Prevention Program at Loma Linda University. In collaboration with the Beach Cities Health District, they're currently leading the largest community-based brain health research initiative in the country. That is the Beach Cities Healthy Minds Initiative. They are also the co-authors of two very important books. The thought-provoking The Alzheimer's Solution, which is this book here, which I also recommend, which introduced me to this wonderful couple and their work. And their newest book, a practical and easy to implement guide, and a Amazon bestseller, by the way, the 30-day Alzheimer's Solution, the definitive food and lifestyle guide to preventing cognitive decline. My name is Robert May, and I'm the executive director of the Kensington here in Redondo Beach, California. Let me tell you a little bit about who we are. Kensington Senior Living was founded in 2010 by a leadership team with over 30 years of experience developing and operating premier senior living residences in the United States and abroad. We understand the difficult decision in placing a loved one into a senior retirement community. Kensington promise is simple yet profound: to love and care for your family as we do our own. It's core to the belief that no aspect of caregiving is more important than our partnership with our residents and their families at every stage of aging. We have two communities in Southern California, one in Redondo Beach and another in Sierra Madre. In addition, we have a dedicated memory care community in Redondo City. We also have 4 communities on the East Coast, and our newest community just opened in Reston, Virginia, with a new building opening in Bethesda. We provide exceptional assisted living and extraordinary memory care solutions for our families. We have 2 neighborhoods in memory care, one is called Connections and the other Haven. Connections is for early onset cognitive impairment, and Haven specializes in supporting advanced cognitive decline. These are 2 very unique settings that support and inspire our residents through different journeys. Now, Dean Sherzai is a MD, has his PhD, MAS, and MPH, and is a behavioral neurologist and research scientist. Aisha Sherzai is also an MD and has her MAS and a vascular neurologist and research scientist. I've also gotten to know them a little bit personally, and they are Renaissance figures. They are not only concerned with Alzheimer's, but they're concerned with the artifice of music, art, language, culture, and how all of that impacts all of us, including our elders. One of the many challenging assumptions that the Sherzais contend with is that lifestyle has nothing to do with the disease of Alzheimer's. You share with us that the facts actually tell a different story, and that we are what we eat, and that positive health habits contribute and allow us to achieve optimal brain health. Our chefs here at the Kensington have already adopted numerous recipes from their latest book and offer these healthy culinary delights to our residents here at the Kensington. We are very excited to have the Sherzais visit our community here in Redondo Beach. Just so you know, folks, we are live from the Kensington. Please welcome Dean and Aisha Sherzai. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. We're very excited to be here, to have the opportunity to speak about something that both Dean and I are passionate about, and we've dedicated our lives to, which is brain health and awareness about diseases of the brain, especially Alzheimer's disease, which is devastating our community. So very excited to be here and speak with you all about it.
Absolutely. So with that, we will start with the brain.
Yes, we have a presentation ready for you, and we're going to go ahead and start. Thank you so much.
Yes. So this is said to be the century of the brain. Not that we didn't have a brain before, it's just that we didn't know a lot about it. And we, despite the common perception that we don't know a lot about the brain, actually we're beginning to learn quite a bit. In fact, in the last 10 years, we've learned more about the brain than any other system in the body. And it's an amazing discoveries that have opened up the world to treatment as well as prevention, which is what we talk about. this 3-pound organ, which is 2% of your body's weight, at any one moment can consume 25% of your body's weight energy. And that's remarkable. This gelatinous, if you ever hold the brain in your hand, you'll be absolutely blown away by the fact that this thing, this organ of consciousness, actually has a quadrillion connections. A mathematical model says that it can process more than any current computer in existence. Yet we don't do much about it. And we almost act like as if it's not part of the rest of the system. But it is. It's the same kind of a system as the heart, the liver, the kidney, but it is so much more. It's literally the most vascular organ in the body. It's the most energy hungry organ in the body. And at the same time, because those things can become overwhelming over time, it's also the most forgiving organ of the body. And that's where we actually hope that people see the possibilities of not only preventing diseases, but expanding cognition well into our 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond. So with that said, we still have to contend with this tsunami, this avalanche that is dementia. Let me describe what dementia is. Dementia is the overarching and umbrella category. What dementia basically is cognitive decline or memory or processing or some aspect of thinking has been affected to the extent where the person can no longer do their daily activities. They have difficulty driving or doing their laundry or shopping or answering phone calls or taking care of their medication and finances. Irrespective, that's dementia in totality. There are several types of dementias. Alzheimer's is the biggest category. 70% or so of all dementias is Alzheimer's. But there are other types: Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal dementia, Huntington's dementia, progressive supranuclear palsy, and many, many others. But Alzheimer's is the biggest category and the one that most of the population knows about. And it's also the fastest growing epidemic in the West, outside of COVID-19, which this will continue to be the fastest growing epidemic. In the United States alone, the number of people suffering from Alzheimer's is actually more than 5.9. Every time we give this talk, we have to change this slide because currently it's more than 6 million people who suffer from Alzheimer's. Every 64 seconds, somebody's being diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And that number is an understatement because in a lot of communities, people never get diagnosed. They just say that it's part of aging and it's never taken into consideration as part of a diagnosis. It's the third leading cause of mortality and morbidity in the United States. And some people say it's number 5, but it's actually number 3 in the US and it's fast rising to become number 1, just like UK, just like Japan, just like most of the European countries. It is going to be number 1 cause of mortality and morbidity in the US. And there are some disparities. As we get older, we have greater risk. Now, I want to make sure that we say it ahead of time, that aging does not equal dementia. Aging, just because you age, it doesn't mean that you will develop dementia or that you have to develop dementia. It's just cumulative trauma towards as you age. But if you reduce the trauma, both physical trauma, chemical trauma, and psychological trauma, the risk goes down. But as it stands, the way we are in the United States right now, after the age of 65, 1 in 10 individuals have the diagnosis of dementia, and that number doubles every 10 years until at age 85, nearly 50% have the diagnosis of dementia. There are other disparities as well. Women are at twice the risk of men. African Americans are between 2 to 4 times greater risk. Hispanics are between 2 to 3 times greater risk. By the way, these risk differences are mostly because of lifestyle and environmental factors, which means that we can affect them, we can influence them, as we'll make it more evident in the rest of the talk. So the other factor, which is pretty bewildering and mind-blowing, is the cost. As bad as the social factors are, the consequences to the families, every family in the United States and the world now, the cost is bewildering. It's $305 billion direct cost, another $240 billion indirect cost. Now, compare that to the second costliest disease in America, which is heart disease, at $120 billion. Compare that to all cancers combined at $70 billion. We're talking about $500 billion plus, and it's fast rising, where by year 2040 to 2050, we're expecting the cost to be anywhere between $1.1 to $3 trillion total cost in Alzheimer's, which means by itself, it will collapse our system, not just our healthcare system, but our system in general. So we really have to start addressing it in different ways than we have so far. But
one second, Nikki, we're having some trouble with the slides. So if you could just say next slide, please, that would be great.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Thank
I was getting stuck.
I suppose
Yes.
there's, they're managing it on the other end. All right. Okay, this is good. Next slide.
Yeah, so this is good. So before we go on as far as what we can do, we have to dispel myths. Without dispelling myth there, we can't have any change. So the one big myth is that Alzheimer's cannot be prevented. Although that was a controversial topic in the past, it's no longer controversial. It's accepted that Alzheimer's can be prevented. I remember 10 years ago that when we were giving these talks, people were feeling uncomfortable, and actually we would not get invited to any further conferences. But now every institution, every organization accepts the fact that Alzheimer's can be prevented for a great number or percentage of the population that is at risk for developing Alzheimer's. The second myth is that the disease starts when you first start forgetting. It doesn't. It starts decades before that. And that's important to know, because a lot of 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds think that they're not going to be affected. No, it starts early, and the sooner we start affecting it, the better. But here's the good news. At any age, we can have significant effect on the progression of this disease, or abatement of disease for that matter. The third myth is that we can solve the problem with one medication. Between Aisha and I, we've had mentors, 8 mentors with 800 publications each. Clinical trial after clinical trial at NIH, Experimental Therapeutics Branch, Aisha at Columbia University, and then the Center of All Dementia, where we worked in, the UCSD at the time. Dozens of clinical trials, 400 to be exact, and not a single one produced results, because it was with the paradigm, with the idea that we could solve it with one drug or one act, and you can't. It's going to be more complex than one drug. And then the last one is that Alzheimer's is a genetic disease. The point behind that statement is as if to say that it's genetic, therefore we can't do something about it. Well, we're genetic beings. Everything in our body is driven by genes. In fact, even our behaviors are to some extent driven by genes. It's the degree of influence of genes that matter. There are diseases like Huntington's disease, where 100% penetrance means if you have the genes, you will get the disease no matter what you do. But for a great number of diseases, it's actually a combination of environment and genes. To date, the model that we have followed has failed at 100%.
Next slide, please. So you have to say next slide.
Next slide.
There you go.
The model we've had has failed 100%. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, so we have the picture of the genetics of Alzheimer's. Now we know there's about 30 or so genes that influence Alzheimer's. Now, the genes that we're talking about are multiple penetrances, meaning that different degrees of influence over outcome. What does that mean? That means that not all the genes involved in Alzheimer's will definitely manifest in Alzheimer's. The number of genes, or the percentage of Alzheimer's that's driven by the kind of genes that if you have the gene, you'll get the disease no matter what, is 3%. You heard it right. Only 3% of Alzheimer's cannot be affected by environment or lifestyle. The other 90% plus are driven by the kinds of genes that are in interplay with genes and environment, genes and lifestyle. One of those genes, which is commonly known as ApoE4. If you have one of those genes, you have 4 times greater risk. If you have 2, one from each parent, your risk goes up 12 times. Well, okay, so if you have 2 genes, does that mean you're going to get the disease? No, 50% of those who have 2 genes never get the disease. Why? Lifestyle. Over and over again, we see that these genes are actually lifestyle genes. Other genes that have to do with your body's response to inflammation, and yet others that have to do with your body's response to getting rid of waste. Well, I'm from a generation where there's a comedian, Red Skelton, who said, "Doctor, it hurts when I do this." And the answer is, don't do that. Well, it's going to damage the brain if we have saturated fat. Well, we shouldn't eat that saturated fat, irrespective of our genes.
Yeah.
if you look at these genetic models, most of them, if not all of them, have to do with environmental factors and the epigenetics of genes and environment working together. Next slide, please. So we've been talking about this for more than a decade, that prevention is the answer. Prevention is the answer. And now, actually, even in Alzheimer's Association International Conference, in the last 2 years, the big plenary talk has been prevention is the new treatment. And we are so glad that everybody's agreeing about this. Now, I want to stop here and say that for those who have developed Alzheimer's, like my grandparents and Aisha's, this is not a sense that it's a failure or the fact that somebody's to blame. No, this is a journey, and it's about us learning more and seeing what we can do to affect the disease process. It's like saying cardiovascular disease is driven by high blood pressure and cholesterol, and it's not a matter of guilt or blame or anything like that. It's about a matter of us knowing and doing something at the population level. So we hope that this approach will be implemented throughout the nation and, for that matter, throughout the world. Next slide, please.
So some of the data that has come to us from different universities and different populations have shown us that lifestyle has tremendous effect on the development of dementia and even the progression of dementia. And we just wanted to kind of show you all, one study that was done in in Rush University. And this study looked at a large number of people in a large population over a long period of time. And they found out that people who had the genetic risk for dementia, they had an increased risk, 60% increased risk of developing it over their lifetime. Next slide, please. Now, if these individuals had an unhealthy life on top of the genetic risk, their risk went up by 360%. That's the impact of an unhealthy lifestyle if people have the genetic pool. Next slide, please. But if you look at the same genetic pool of individuals, and if they had healthy lifestyle, their risk of dementia was reduced to less than a third. Less than 30% of them developed dementia. Next slide, please. So it essentially shows us that adherence to a healthy lifestyle can offset genetic risk, which means that our lifestyle determines whether we activate those genes that can damage the brain and result in dementia overall. Next slide, please.
So what are the factors that determine risk? That's important. And we looked at the data, and we've done several research projects around this concept. There seems to be 4 fundamental principles behind cognitive or brain diseases, but most health in general. It's inflammation, oxidation, glucose dysregulation, and lipid dysregulation or fat dysregulation. So what does that mean? That means that if the fat metabolism in our body goes awry, that's going to increase our risk. If our energetic metabolism or glucose metabolism goes awry, then that's going to be a path, such as diabetes and prediabetes. And we did a paper that actually looked at prediabetes at the national level, and even pre-diabetics had lower cognitive state and higher greater risk. And then, of course, inflammation, which is a common denominator, is a big risk factor for people who have traumatic brain injury or repetitive brain injuries and infections and inflammatory processes. And oxidation. So these 4 processes are drivers. They're not independent. The body is a closed system. They're all connected, but sometimes one or the other leads the path. So how do you deal with these 4 processes over a lifespan or over a short period of time? Very simple. What are the things that drive these processes the most? It's nutrition, it's exercise or movement, it's stress, it's restorative sleep, and it's, as an add-on, it's mental activity, which is incredibly important. So with that, next slide, please. Next slide after this. We came up with this self-serving acronym because we're both neurologists. NEURO, which is N for nutrition, E for exercise, U for unwind, which is about good and bad stress. By the way, good stress is as important, in fact, more important than bad stress. The brain needs to work. The brain needs to be challenged. The brain needs to be driven towards a purpose. Otherwise, the rest fall apart. And R is restorative sleep. Yes, you could knock somebody out with medication. By the way, we're not against medicine, sleep medicine. But long term, it should be a pattern of restorative sleep. And lastly, optimizing mental activity, which is that purpose-driven challenge to the brain. These 5 factors take in basically all the variables needed to take care of the brain. By the way, in that list, you don't see any vitamin concoctions, and there are a lot of doctors out there selling books disguised as, vitamin shops disguised as books. There's a lot of people selling these vitamins over at night that are supposed to be blue jellyfish that save the brain. None of that. It's basic, simple things that you can do in your home, in your work, and your community. And that's empowering.
Next slide, please. All right, so we wanted to give you all a brief description of what NEURO stands for. We're going to try not to become too scientific and use less medical jargon, but I think it's important for us to understand that this information comes from an evidence-based source, and this is what science has been telling us over and over again. And we have, despite all the confusion about brain health and things like nutrition, we have a tremendous amount of information that can guide us, that gives us a vector of what's good and what's bad. So let's talk about nutrition. Next slide, please. Now, when it comes to nutrition, despite all the noise, you hear about the diet of the day or about the plant of the day or the vitamin of the day, the data shows us that when people eat unprocessed or whole foods and mostly plant-based, they tend to do very well because these foods have an amazing combination of nutrients that are presented to our body in a synergistic way, and our body recognizes them, and our body is able to absorb them in a beautiful way, and our brain can use them to not only survive but thrive. And next slide, please. When you look at the combination of data coming from different studies, we've seen that foods that are unprocessed or untouched and are mostly plant-based, they tend to be the best foods for brain health. So we're talking about fruits and vegetables and whole grains and nuts and seeds and legumes. And as important as it is to add foods that are healthy, it's also important to get rid of some of the foods that could potentially be very unhealthy for our brain and for the rest of the body as well. We always say, when you take care of the brain, you've taken care of the rest of the body. And I'm so glad that you don't have to completely modify your lifestyle and diet for brain health. But since the brain is such an important organ and it's so energy hungry, whatever we do, whatever kinds of foods that we eat affects our brain first. So the things that are associated with poor brain health and damage to the brain are, bad fats, things like trans fatty acids that are found in processed foods, or a lot of saturated fats, and refined carbohydrates in the form of white bread, say for example, or baked goods that are not cooked with good fats. Those can be very harmful. We're not reductionists. There's no such thing as a superfood. All foods are amazing, and it's important for us to eat a variety of different foods. But some foods actually stand out as far as their anti-inflammatory components are concerned. So we're talking about greens, we're talking about berries, and we're talking about beans that have complex carbohydrates. Those seem to be actually very, very healthy. Next slide, please. Right. And we wanted to actually touch on the Mediterranean diet because we hear about it quite often. The Mediterranean diet, and now even a more refined version of the Mediterranean diet, is the MIND diet. That it has been studied extensively, and Dean and I have had the opportunity to study it in larger population as well. And as some of you may have heard, it's been associated with lower risk of Alzheimer's disease. So I wanted to show you what the components of a Mediterranean diet is and what is the construct of this Mediterranean diet score that people keep on talking about. Next slide, please. So when you look at the components of the Mediterranean diet, and there's a scoring system that has been created, you get a high score, or you're set to adhere to a Mediterranean diet when you consume lots and lots of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, nuts and seeds, legumes, and good fats, which are mono and polyunsaturated fats. Think of extra virgin olive oil or avocados or nuts and seeds. And then sources of omega fats, which could potentially be fish, or could be flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts, and things of that nature. And people can tend to get lower score when they consume sources of saturated fats and bad fats like trans fatty acids. Next slide, please. And so when you look at food as a totality, it is one of the most important environmental risk factor for our brain and for our body. You know, this is something that we expose our body to 3 or sometimes even more times a day. And so what we eat really, really determines the cellular structure, the interaction of the brain cells with each other, and the possibility of the brain to continuously grow and thrive. And from multiple global studies, we've known that food is actually a very important risk factor for a lot of the secondary risk factors that could affect the brain. So we always know, we've always heard about the fact that people who have high blood pressure can have higher risk of dementia, or people who have high cholesterol or unchecked cholesterol can have higher levels of or risk of dementia. So same is the case with diabetes as well. And studies like this one, next slide please, shows us that, you know, food is very important, and it's a very important factor for prevention of not only dementia, but most diseases in the United States and around the world. Next slide, please. So when it comes to summarizing the data on nutrition, I think Michael Pollan put it very well. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And when you stick to that rule and understand that whole foods and mostly plant-based are helpful, we've known for a long time that they do prevent degeneration of the brain cells, neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease, and also neurovascular diseases like stroke. Saturated fats and refined carbohydrates in the form of refined sugar and, you know, white flour, they tend to be associated with inflammation. Contrary to that, complex carbohydrates found in, say, for example, sweet potatoes and vegetables and 100% whole wheat breads and unrefined pastas, they're amazing. They're great sources of energy for our brain and for our body. And vitamins and nutrients are best derived from foods and not supplements. And there's a caveat to that. There are some situations where, say, for example, people are lower on vitamin levels. Say your vitamin level D is low or your vitamin B12 is low. In those kind of situations, working very closely with your healthcare provider to find out why it's so and replacing them is important. But to go out of your way to take vitamins, assuming that it would prevent dementia or it would, you know, provide some sort of nutrient for the brain, there's really not much evidence for that.
The one other caveat is that we just did 2 major reviews, comprehensive reviews on omega-3. Omega-3 and the developing brain and omega-3 and the aging brain. On the children's side, there appears to be a trend towards use or taking omega-3 in children because of its incredible importance for developing brain. And also it's true for aging brain. So whether you're getting your omega-3 consciously and in a planned way from foods, that's one way, or you can take supplements, but it goes without saying that omega-3s are extremely important for brain on those 2 ends of the spectrum.
Definitely. Next slide, please.
So exercise. Exercise is extremely important. It's more important for the brain than any other system in the body because the brain actually benefits more from it in so many different ways. So exercise actually cleanses the brain. Exercise increases the blood flow to the brain being the most active organ. And exercise increases these hormones called BDNF and GDNF, which are actually growth factors for connections between neurons. Remember that each of the 87 billion neurons that we have can make a couple of connections or as many as 30,000 connections each. Throughout life, that's the most magical concept I've learned, that at any age, although we don't grow new neurons as much, we do some, but that's not as important the fact that we can connect between neurons at an exponential rate. And what determines that is exercise and mental activity. So exercise is incredibly important. The 3 types of exercise that seem to be important.
Next slide, please.
Next
sorry.
slide, yeah.
Sorry.
Is aerobic exercise. The second thing is don't be sedentary, move throughout the day. Make sure that you create an environment around your home and work where you're standing and moving, because sedentary behavior actually negates the benefit of exercise. And then thirdly, which came out of the research we did and others, that shows that leg strength is incredibly important for brain health. In fact, there was a correlation between strong directional correlation that bigger legs, stronger legs, bigger and stronger brain. So build your legs, especially as you get older. For many reasons, especially the fact that the #1 cause of going to the emergency room as we get older is fall risk. And the thing that reduces that is leg strength. Also, what increases blood supply to the brain is leg strength. So those three factors are critically important. In fact, when we start our program in any community, we start with exercise first. And we start with leg strength and aerobic exercise first. So next slide.
Because it involves balance in your
does.
core,
It
and
does.
that prevents folks from falling
Exactly.
later on.
Exactly.
That's
Extremely
true.
important.
And the other thing is that the biggest blood pump in your body is not the heart, it's the legs.
Mhm.
The legs pumping this massive blood supply from the legs are the muscles of the leg. And the stronger the legs, the better pump. So the next factor is stress. Simply, stress is two components of stress. Tension is another word for stress. Your brain requires tension in order for it to continue growing, in order for it to continue connecting, especially as you get older. You need to put your brain in stress mode. But what kind of stress? So next slide. There are two kinds of stress: good stress and bad stress. Good stress is the kind of stress that's driven by your purpose. It has a direction and it's time bound. It's the kind of activities that you wanted to do and you know you're going to accomplish, and it pushes you towards that activity. That actually pushes the brain to make connections. We're talking at the rate of millions of connections with each activity. There's no drug that will come in any foreseeable future that can do that. Next slide. Bad stress is the kind of stress that's not driven by your purpose, isn't clear as far as its timelines or its successes, and it creates this chronic state of tension, anxiety, and what we call endocrine overdrive or sympathetic overdrive, which actually can be incredibly destructive over time. So identifying the good stressors specifically and increasing, empowering, and tooling those good stressors is important. Identifying the bad stressors specifically and measurably, and reducing, eliminating, and delegating those stressors. Basically, that's at the core of any behavior change. Because without that, you can't develop a lifestyle around food, sleep, or cognitive activity. All it will be is a diet of the day or exercise plan of the day. Stress management becomes core in any program that we take on.
So our connection to digital devices might be considered a bad stressor.
It depends. If the digital device is teaching you music,
right,
it's great. If the digital device you're using, which I use a lot, playing chess, it's good stress. If the digital devices you're using is teaching you, you're taking a class that you always wanted to, then it's good stress. But if the digital device is all it is Candy Crush or organizing or disorganizing all the time, that creates stress and tension.
Or listening to bad news and not having any control over it could be bad stress.
Exactly. So the tools you use, if it serves your purpose, it can exponentially grow your brain. Next slide.
All right, so sleep. What a cute baby. I don't think anybody sleeps like that anymore. In any case, next slide, please. So sleep is probably the most important time during the day for the brain. The brain puts itself in danger of being completely unconscious and disconnected from reality so that it could restore itself. We've completely ignored the importance of sleep during our lifetime. And, I can say that to you as a physician. There was a time when we would take pride in the fact that we didn't need sleep and we would function completely, quote unquote, normally. It was never normal, but because we thought that it was just a waste of time. But now, with the tremendous amount of information coming to us, we know that when we sleep, the brain essentially does two very important functions. The first thing that it does is it cleanses itself. We have a very complex janitorial system that gets activated when we sleep. And there are specialized cells and systems that get rid of the waste products that are produced during the day. Remember, the brain is a very, very active organ. So you can imagine the amount of byproducts that are created by the cells and by the mechanisms itself. So all of that gets cleansed at night when we reach the deeper stages of sleep. And even one night of sleeplessness or disrupted sleep can actually damage that process and doesn't allow for those byproducts to be cleansed. The second thing that happens when we sleep is that our memories get consolidated. So in a simpler way, our memories get placed in the right file, folder, and cabinet when we sleep. And there are specific functions that occur in our mind that allows for us to remember short-term memory the next day better. They've done studies on people who have studied the night before, the day before, they've had a good night's sleep, and then the next day they actually do better. But if they don't get a good night's sleep, those memories are not consolidated, and their neuropsychological test scores are poor the following day. So it's very, very important for all of us to work on developing the right kind of habits to have a deep restorative sleep. Now that in itself is an entire talk that we could probably spend a lot of time on. It involves sleep hygiene, changes in behavior, changes in environment, changes in food, cognitive behavioral therapy. But if anybody wants to invest in a spa for the brain, I think addressing sleep is the most important spa for your brain. We've also known that when people have unmanaged or undiagnosed sleep disorders such as sleep apnea or restless leg syndrome, they have a heightened increase in Alzheimer's disease. Specifically, sleep apnea, it has been associated with a 70% higher risk of development of Alzheimer's disease. And on the contrary, if untreated, yes. And if it's treated, that actually significantly reduces the Alzheimer's risk. Next slide, please.
So next is optimize, which is that good stress we were talking about earlier. So next slide. We just did a meta-analysis that was published 2 years ago, and we gathered all the data on what cognitive activities would benefit the brain, especially pre-dementia brain, MCI, mild cognitive impairment. And that's an important stage because it actually reflects all states of brain. The three things that came out of that meta-analysis was purpose, complexity, and challenge. What does that mean? Activities that served your purpose, that were complex, which means real life activities that encompass multiple domains of the brain. And I'll give you examples of all these. And thirdly, that you pushed yourself continuously to the next level, protected you against dementia, and actually grew your brain throughout your life. So purpose-driven activities mean things that you like or you would like to like, meaning that maybe, for example, I want to learn how to fly airplane. I mean, I don't know if I will like it. Once I get up there, I'll know, but I think I will like it. But that act of learning how to fly, how to learn all the codes and all the factors is going to push my brain. So that's a purpose-driven. It's complex because in order to learn something like that, I have to learn, it involves all aspects of my brain. And it's challenging because every time I learn something, there will be something else to learn. An easier example of that is learning a musical instrument like guitar. Aisha is a phenomenal singer. I'm the worst guitarist in history of mankind, and I'm not exaggerating. But let's say that you're learning guitar. You're learning the language. That's left parietal lobe. You're processing it visually. That's your occipital lobe. You're processing it thoughtfully. That's your frontal lobe. You're being creative. It's your right parietal lobe. You're emotionally involved. That's your limbic system. Your dexterity involves your motor system. That's no Sudoku. That's your brain on fire. That's your brain being involved at all aspects. You know about this when we talk about music. There is nothing like learning a musical instrument. I'm not saying all of you have to become concert pianists, but music is great. Learning how to dance is great. That involves even motor function. You don't want to see me dance either, so that's a different problem. Taking a class that you've always wanted to, leading a group, managing a team, volunteering, art, painting. These are complex behaviors that are driven by your purpose, have clear timelines, clear victories, and let's say that you get good at guitar, you learn the 4 chords that basically takes care of most of 60s music. Then there's 5 chord songs and you keep pushing yourself. That's the challenge part. This is important because it actually has been shown to be the factor that most affects and protects the brain. Keeping your brain continuously challenged is critical. Here's the other side of it. People who were mentally active and then they retired and they didn't do anything for 2 to 3 years, they had the steepest decline in cognition. Why? Because as we get older, the brain is spending that energy that we were talking about, 25% of energy. Yet if you're not using it, you're not challenging it, it says, oh, I don't need to spend as much. It pulls all those connections and the pathway to Alzheimer's opens up. So use your brain. We say, don't retire, rewire. So, but take all these 5 factors together and we say that as much as 90% of Alzheimer's can potentially be averted. Next slide, please.
Are there studies that show the benefits of being a musician? I'm wondering if there's been.
There are
Yes.
absolutely. Right. So I'm writing a concept around consciousness and islands, and islands of consciousness. And one of the islands is self. At 3 years of age, we become aware of ourself apart from us. Here's the biggest island: tonality and prosody. That's music, a form of music. Before we have language, we have music. After we've lost language in Alzheimer's, we still have music. That's the beauty of music. So, yeah. What we do, Aisha and I, is we've done the molecular work. And I think we're the first people to actually go into the communities and translate this into the communities. And we do it in a way that we have to address each community with their strengths and weaknesses, because we don't come with one monosyllabic or one big program here. Here's the protocol that you have to implement. You have to look at each community and what can work in each community and then implement it as such. And we're so proud to be part of this community, Beach Cities Health District. In fact, we were so honored that we moved here to live. So we think that this is the future of Alzheimer's prevention, which is coming to the communities and empowering the communities to help avert through these 5 aspects, which is the neuro aspect.
Next slide, please. All right, so with that in mind, with all of our trainings in different universities and with our experiences with patients in the clinic and in the hospital, Dean and I have been implementing the concept of brain health. Next slide, please. We wanted to...
I stole for her.
No. We just wanted to give you a little more description of the Healthy Minds Initiative that we're so proud of, partnering with the Beach Cities Health District. So this is a community-based study of lifestyle and the impact of lifestyle on cognitive health in 500 participants in collaboration with BCHD. It's a 3-year study where we do cognitive tests before and after, and every year we get brain MRIs through the participants' primary care physicians, blood biomarkers, and we collect a lot of information about individuals' lifestyles, and we implement the NEURO Plan. Next slide, please. And well, this Robert showed you the book. Next slide, please. We just wanted to, next slide, please. I don't know that there were a lot of food pictures, but you can just kind of go through the food pictures if you don't mind. There you go. And at the end of the slide, I think there it is. This is what I wanted to show you all. We essentially are, recruiting individuals who are living in the beach cities, the Manhattan, Redondo, and Hermosa Beach. And they're more than welcome to join this group. I don't even want to call it a study anymore. I think it's more of a community now. We are collecting a lot of data, but it's almost a movement where we're trying to disperse this message of hope and empowerment about brain diseases, about the prevention of cognitive decline. And we have our research coordinator, Nicole Lundy, who is always available to answer any questions. And if anybody has any questions or they want more information, they can always contact her.
One that beautifully stated, this study is so important to us and to everybody, because if we're able to prove that at the community level, there's a lot of studies in the clinic and so on and so forth, which is actually contrived. But if we can actually implement this at the community level, then this becomes the model for the rest of the nation. And we're well on our way to create the most successful community-based program in the country here with the Beach Cities Health District.
That is just extraordinary. That is in our backyard. Here we are in Redondo Beach, but of course serving all of our neighboring communities as well. So, I mean, it's inspiring to know that research like that is being done here. Now, I also know that we have some questions, right? And there's a few questions that have come to us, and I'm sure there's many questions. So first of all, folks, if there's questions that don't get answered today, please send them to us, and we promise to get back to you. But one of the questions is, and it's come up a few times, but why are women at higher risk for Alzheimer's? We know that to be factual now, and it is that's a difficult statistic for women to hear.
Yes.
It's multifactorial. One of the factors is that women live longer than men, but that's not the totality of it, because the longer you live, that means that the greater trauma you've accumulated over life. It's the other factors are hormonal. We know that now we're doing a little better as far as managing that transition in menopause and what hormones at what stage. It's not just whether people should get the hormones or not, but how and when, that's a critical factor. The third factor is that pregnancy and multiparity seems to be a risk factor, a vascular risk factor. And then fourthly, the population that comes to us at this point, in their 80s and 90s, we go back 70 to 60 years, they were not, the environment and society was such that they were not pushed as much cognitively. So that reserve component has a factor as well. So there are multiple factors. We don't think it's a genetic thing by itself. It's a complexity of all of these factors. And actually, that's one of the things that we're studying to figure out why this disparity, because once you figure out one disparity, it gives a picture into everything else as well. So.
But it becomes a very important point for women to start taking care of themselves as early as possible because they're at that heightened risk. And I think that's one thing that we've seen constantly is that when the conversation about brain health is started earlier, women tend to do much, much better later on.
And another reason why women have to lead, women should always lead because they're better leaders, but because 2/3 of all Alzheimer's cases are women, and 2/3 of all caregivers are women. So they're incredibly burdened, both financially and in every sense.
Thank you. Who should worry most about getting Alzheimer's? I know we've talked about that briefly, but.
Yes, so as we showed in the diagram during the first few slides, people can come to Alzheimer's disease from multiple directions. People who tend to have uncontrolled vascular risk factors, for example, if they've had midlife high blood pressure or cholesterol or prediabetes or diabetes that wasn't managed well, they could be at heightened risk. People who have had multiple head traumas could be at heightened risk. People who've had tremendous amount of stress that was not really addressed and controlled over a long period of time could be at heightened risk. Again, just because somebody's parent or a loved one, genetically related loved one had Alzheimer's disease, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be at a higher risk. Most of the cases of Alzheimer's disease are related to lifestyle. Very few percentage are directly genetic, which means it has a high penetrance. So, people who tend to have these unmanaged vascular risk factors need to make sure that they take care of it. And one of the things that we're trying to talk about is don't wait for you to have any symptoms. It's always important for you to keep thinking about your brain health in general, even before any symptoms come. So the conversation has to start early with any healthcare provider.
Right. And then, of course, back to diet again. So some of the questions being, what are the powerful foods that we can eat to prevent Alzheimer's or to provide good health, which I know you've talked about briefly, but maybe we can elaborate a little bit more on.
Yeah, sure.
We've identified this concept of NEURO9. Although we're not reductionist, it's all about food, not a particular thing. But NEURO9 seems to be, when we looked at the inflammatory quotient, which means what foods are most anti-inflammatory, antioxidants. So there are 9 things that stand out. So we came up with the concept of NEURO9. I'll pass it on to Aisha to see if she can remember the NEURO9.
I feel tested.
Tested, okay.
Right. Well, so foods that are very, very high as far as their anti-inflammatory indices are concerned are greens, beans, whole grains. I'm going to laugh now. Nuts and seeds, spices and herbs. Spices and herbs, ounce for ounce, have the highest amount of anti-inflammatory, and they're delicious too.
Yeah.
Things like sources of omega fats are seeds, flax seeds and chia seeds. Cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts, they have particular chemicals. Specifically, broccoli has sulforaphane. Sulforaphane actually relaxes our arteries so that the brain can get more oxygen and blood. And I've kind of lost count.
You got it.
We talked about nuts and seeds because they're an amazing source of good fats, and specifically seeds. They have higher amount of plant-based omega-3 fatty acids. They have a compound called alpha-linoleic acid, which gets converted to DHA and EPA. These are the fats that the brain uses on a regular basis.
And tea.
And green tea. Yes, tea, but especially green tea. I think we covered it.
You got it, yes.
Yeah. Back to stress, increasing risk of Alzheimer's. I know we can't, good stress, bad stress. that I think is illuminating for individuals. I don't think people understand how that really contributes. Maybe it contributes to overall ill health. And we live in a stressful world today. We're pressured in so many different ways with work, life, career, raising families. It is also, COVID we've had for the last, 16 months that's changed the world. So in some ways, maybe, there are some benefits from some of that. We have become more internalized, maybe we've concentrated more on ourselves, right? And so maybe some greater health solutions have resulted as part of that journey. But where do you see this moving forward in terms of society?
We think that stress is incredibly important, and sometimes things that are important that are amorphous, which means that it doesn't have a good shape, we kind of ignore, no matter how important it is, but we have to bring it to light and simplify it. This is why we think that every time you have stress, we're talking moment by moment, that effect is significant on the body. There's a process, we call it the limbic hypothalamic pituitary axis. Your interpretation of a behavior, whether it's good or bad, varies. The same behavior that I might consider stressful, you might consider not stressful. That interpretation matters. Here's part of the clue. And if it's interpreted as stressful, bad stress, it sends a different message to hypothalamus, which then sends a different message to pituitary. Now, pituitary is hormone central. Growth hormone, stress hormones, sex hormones, insulin, everything is affected there, including your immune system. So every time you're feeling stress, bad stress, that completely discombobulates and throws our hormonal system. I call it the hormone chaos. And that increases your chance of cancers and infections and everything else. So we have to take it seriously. And the way out of it is actually pretty simple. I mean, I made it scary, but here's it simple. We really think that by people kind of making it a chore, by sitting down and writing down specifically what a bad stress is. So I don't like my work is not good definition. I don't like the drive to my work. It's specific. Like we have to drive 2 hours to Loma Linda, or an hour and a half to get there. That's bad stress. So sometimes you can't do anything about it, so you give it a different name. But by naming it specifically, you can then affect it by reducing, eliminating, delegating. That has profound effect. Another way to affect the stress is meditation and mindfulness. Not for that time in meditation. It's to become aware of that state of calm. In this running world, in this running universe, you become an ever-present force of stress. I mean, necks are tight, the muscles are tight. When you do a meditative state or just mindful breathing, you become aware of the relaxed state. That awareness is important because then you can take it to the rest of your day. These simple measures are not nominal. We keep talking about broccoli, which is great because we both have a master's in nutrition. But stress management is probably even more or as much as important. So it's important for people to talk about it, to start learning how to manage it, because the long-term effect of it can be destructive at so many levels.
That sort of leads us to back to mental activity again. I mean, the artifice of music, as to console us, to motivate us, to inspire us, to have catharsis, right? Is also part of reducing stress in one's life. Unfortunately, with orchestras and musicians really struggling for the last year and a half, I think that has really impacted our society and the lack of that outlet. So hopefully, moving forward here, as the world returns to a little bit of normalcy, we're able to have Hollywood Bowl and the Los Angeles Phil, and all these things are going to come back again to be part of our lives again, and to really help us also reduce stress. And we need to be aware of that. Absolutely, that's I thank you so much for sharing so much of your knowledge and your wisdom with us, and your passion for wanting to make a difference here in Beach Cities. We're proud to have you as sort of leaders and visionaries to make this change, and I suspect this change is going to flow across the country. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us. It's wonderful to be here and share this information and share it with everyone. Thank you.
You're very welcome.